It was our 10th anniversary, and we thought camping would be a great way to celebrate. Just the two of us and our dog. There's a big national park with camping areas near our home. Less than an hour's drive away, so we decided to head there. The park is a huge forest filled with tall trees, quiet trails, and clear lakes. There are small ponds scattered around and plenty of camping spots for visitors. It's a favorite place for people to visit during summer, with families, hikers, and campers filling the area. But since it was late September and the weather was chilly, the park felt quieter. We still saw a few people here and there, but it was peaceful compared to the busy summer months. There was a long path that went around the lake near our camp, so we followed it. The lake was small, and there was another camping site on the other side. From our camp, they could see that site, and from there they could see us too. The two campsites were almost across from each other. But when we walked past the other camp, we saw a man there alone. He was just standing and catching us. When we said hello, he didn't answer. He looked about the same age as us, maybe in his late 20s. I thought he might just be shy or a bit unusual. He had a small tent set up and some things scattered around, so it seemed like he had been there for a while. After some time, we made it back to our camp and decided to set up our tent before it got too dark. Once the tent was ready, we cooked some food over the fire. Then out of nowhere, our dog started barking like crazy. She was tied to a long wire attached to a tree, and her barking was loud and sharp. At first, we tried to calm her down, thinking she might be overreacting. But then we realized she wasn't just barking for no reason. The sound of rustling came from the woods nearby, and the feeling of something watching us was hard to ignore. Whatever it was close. I mean, too close. By then, it had been dark for hours. I put the dog on a leash while my husband started, looking around with his bright headlamp. Our dog kept barking nonstop. We were confused and thought it might be some animal, like a bear or a moose. But we couldn't understand why it wasn't afraid of us or why it didn't leave. My husband decided to check the path that led to the other camp. When he reached the path, which was less than 10 meters from our camp, he saw something on the ground. I told him to check it out, and I followed with our dog. He stopped, looked at me, and said, "It's a person lying on the ground." My first thought was that they might be hurt or lifeless. The person was lying face down, not moving at all. We called out, "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Suddenly they stood up without saying a word. It turned out it was the man from the other camp. He looked very shaken and was clearly scared of our dog. He quickly told me not to let her near him, and I see he was on edge. At that moment, I felt a little relieved, thinking it wasn't some huge, dangerous bear that might attack us. But soon I realized that this man might have been even more frightening than any bear. After he stood up, he walked right over to our campfire, sat down without saying anything, and just stared at the flames. The tension in the air grew thick. My husband, still trying to understand what was going on, asked him several times why he was walking alone in the dark forest without any light. He didn't answer us. We tried to lighten the mood by laughing a little and telling him how we thought he was a bear or something. But he didn't even smile. He just stared at the fire, looking annoyed. We noticed his right leg was soaking wet, probably from stepping off the path and getting it in the lake while walking to our camp. He stayed with us for about 30 minutes house, hardly saying anything. It was clear he was keeping an eye on our dog, looking around to see where she was all the time. I also saw a knife hanging from his belt. I figured it wasn't that strange since he was out in the woods, but it still made me uneasy. Every few minutes, he would quietly put his hand in his pocket, just enough to peek at whatever was inside. It reminded me of when someone checks the time on their phone without taking it out of their pocket. But it wasn't a phone he had there. Then finally, after what felt like forever, he stood up again, mumbled something about going back to his own camp, and turned to leave without another word. He never explained why he came to our camp or why he was following us in the dark. I turned to my husband and said there was no way I was going to sleep in that tent. It felt like the biggest no ever. My husband agreed with me. He said the man might come back while we were sleeping. I just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. So my husband started packing up our things. Thankfully, our car was close by. I stayed near the camp, guarding it, shining the light around to see if the man was coming back. Just as we were almost done getting everything into the car, I saw a quick flash of light on the path between his camp and ours. It was him. He was coming back. Maybe he thought we had gone to sleep because he couldn't see our campfire anymore. My stomach dropped, and without saying a word, we quickly jumped into the car. I looked behind us as we drove off, making sure he wasn't following. We left as fast as we could. I'm not sure if we overreacted, but I had such a bad feeling about him. Who would walk through the dark, wet forest alone just to watch strangers? What would he have done if our dog hadn't heard him? What were his intentions? Maybe he planned to hurt us while we were sleeping. I don't know, and I didn't want to stay there to find out. I'm just glad we had our dog with us. She might have saved our lives. I think people are the scariest thing you can find at night when you're camping. This happened to me a while back when I went on another solo camping trip. I enjoy camping by myself because being in the middle of the wilderness feels peaceful and clears my mind. It's always been a way for me to relax. I picked a trail, packed my camping gear, brought some snacks, and after double-checking everything, I loaded it all into my truck and set off. I find a nice open clearing that looks perfect for camping and decide to set up there. The spot is surrounded by tall trees with soft grass covering the ground. I'm really tired after hiking all day, but I push through and set up my tent at the southern edge of the clearing, right near the tree line. Once the tent is ready, I gather some dry wood and manage to start a small fire. Then I unpack some food and roast a few hot dogs over the fire. Then suddenly I notice a faint noise coming from the distance. At first I think it's just part of the usual forest sounds, as it reminds me of an animal. Maybe a deer struggling to walk as if one of its legs is hurt. I felt sorry for the poor animal, but it was too far away and it was getting dark, so I couldn't go check on it or help it. I decided not to think about it anymore and went back to eating my food. After finishing my meal, I put out the fire carefully to make sure it wouldn't start again. Then I crawled into my tent and got into my sleeping bag. Even though I was tired and feeling calm, I couldn't fall asleep right away. I pulled out a book I had packed and started reading it, using the small lamp I brought to light up the pages. Hours passed and I heard the same sound again, but this time it was much closer. It was coming from the opposite side of the clearing. I stopped reading, put my book down, and listened carefully. The sound was getting louder as the animal moved across the clearing toward my tent. Now, it didn't just sound like slow steps. It was loud, and it seemed like the hooves were being slammed into the ground. After each step, there was a dragging noise, like the deer was pulling something heavy behind it. The sound got closer and seemed to stop in what I guessed was the middle of the clearing. Then everything went completely silent. I couldn't hear breathing or even the faintest sound from whatever was out there. I slowly unzipped my tent and peeked outside. The clearing stretched out before me, quiet and dark, with the trees standing tall and still around it. My eyes scanned the area, but there was nothing. Just shadows and the faint outline of trees under the dim starlight. I stared for a while, trying to make sense of it. Where had the noise come from? Why had it stopped? Feeling uneasy, I zipped the tent back up and sat inside, straining to hear anything unusual. But there was nothing. I reminded myself that the woods often have strange noises that don't mean anything dangerous. Animals move around, branches fall, and sounds carry in odd ways. I tried to push the thoughts out of my head and told myself I was safe. I stayed alert for a while longer, hoping to hear something that would explain it. But eventually I decided to stop worrying and focus on resting. I was starting to fall asleep when I suddenly heard men laughing in the distance to my right. Then I heard women laughing and the sound of sticks snapping far off to my left. Now wide awake, I sat up, wondering if I was really hearing this or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me because I was half asleep. But then I heard more faint laughter coming from different directions. It sounded like all kinds of voices. Old men, old women, even children. The laughter sounded strange, and the way it echoed around the forest made me feel uneasy. I was deep in the woods, far away from other people, and the noise earlier had already set off alarms in my head. Something about the timing, the voices, and the way the laughter carried through the trees told me this wasn't just a family out for a walk. But then I noticed something even more unsettling. The usual sounds of the night had stopped. No crickets chirping, no rustling leaves, not even the wind blowing through the trees. Everything was still, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. That was when I decided I'd had enough. I couldn't sit there in the silence wondering what was happening. I unzipped the tent, stepped outside, and fired a shot into the night sky, hoping to make some noise and break the creepy stillness that surrounded me. And I noticed the laughter was gone and the usual forest sounds were back. I started to relax a little, thinking that the shot had scared whoever it was away. Feeling tired and still on edge, I sat down and eventually fell asleep. Then after a while, I woke up in a cold sweat feeling anxious and realized it was still dark outside. As soon as I woke up, I heard two people whispering not far from my tent. I couldn't make out much of what they were saying, but I heard something about being lost. I felt a rush of unease and shouted, "Hey, who's there?" The voices immediately stopped. The silence felt heavy, so I called out again, "Are you guys lost? Who's there?" Then suddenly, without warning, a massive burst of fire shot up from the middle of the clearing like a flamethrower. The flames lit up the entire area, and for a split second, I saw several dark shapes of people standing around, frozen in place. Without looking around, I got up and ran out of my tent. Turning left and heading back toward the trail, I hiked all the way through the night, only stopping when the sun started to rise. I kept my head turned over my shoulder the whole time, but I never heard anyone following me, and I didn't see anyone or anything. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. After that night, I lost all the enjoyment I had for camping alone. It felt like I left more than just my gear behind in the woods. My friends and I went camping to celebrate my birthday, but on the second day, something really unexpected happened. To explain, we were at the edge of a field, shaped like a peninsula surrounded by woods on three sides. We were cooking over the campfire and playing Pitbull songs loudly since there was a concert nearby that we couldn't attend. Then we heard what we later learned was the cry of a baby coyote. We copied the sound because we thought, why not? But then it started coming closer very quickly, so we used flashlights trying to see its eyes in the dark, but saw nothing, even when we pointed the light straight at the noise. We aimed the lights at the open field and the woods around it in case it came out. The sound stopped, so we thought it got scared and played Pitbull again. But just 5 seconds later, the sound started again, but this time from the other side of the field. We were scared, so we quickly got in the car and drove to my house, which was only half a mile away. We wanted to grab some things for protection, like a baseball bat, because we thought it might just be a raccoon or a lone coyote. But then we figured those animals aren't too hard to handle if they got too close. While we were at the house, one of my friends, who is very spiritual, said they had a bad feeling about the situation. So we also grabbed a sage stick, a blessed rosary, hoping it would help in case something unusual was going on. As we got back to the field, my few spiritual friends, and even me, felt very off, and I was extremely nauseous. So as we parked my car, we said to secure food and grab essentials in order to leave. We secured most of the food and stayed in groups in case it was a predatory animal. The noise started circling again, and as we got the last of the essentials from the campsite and began to get back in the car, it started up again directly behind the tent. The last person finally got in the car, and just as we were about to leave, another friend and I both saw something moving behind the tent. It looked like a misty, shadowy shape. It was walking on two legs, and at first I thought I was just seeing smoke or something strange in the air. But when we got back to my house, my other friend, who had also seen it, told me they saw the exact same thing. I really didn't want to stick around any longer, so as soon as everyone was safely in the car, I floored it out of the field, driving as fast as I could to get away from there. As soon as we pulled into my driveway, the noise started again. But this time it was on the other side of my house, far from the field. We were so scared. We just left half of our things in the car. My 3 spiritual friends used sage to cleanse the house, making sure to do all the windows and doors especially. My cat wouldn't come inside until we finished using the sage. Then it just stood by the door staring at it. Now it's the next day, and we're all really terrified. A deer keeps standing across the road staring into my windows. We went back to take down the campsite, and none of the food had been touched. So it couldn't have been a raccoon or coyotes. I've never been very spiritual before, But if this is something supernatural or a dangerous being, I want to protect myself and my family.